Hi there, my name is Rachel Elrod. I'm a JFK assassination researcher, and I'm going to share with us in this video a few thoughts that I had to kind of help us all understand the research journey that Richard Hook and myself have been on over a long period of time, so that we can understand really the journey that we went on to get us to the place of asking the questions about Jackie Kennedy being an assassin of JFK in the back of that limo on the 22nd of November 1963. And I think it's really important to understand that we didn't just pluck this idea out of thin air. It didn't just come to us, or we didn't just make it up. There was a very definite process of understanding, and we got to that place. And I just wanted to share really how that has occurred. Okay, so the first thing to say really is that Richard had, before we met each other, Richard had been researching the JFK assassination for some years and had made some partnerships with other people. And one of the people that had touched base with him was a guy called Rod McKenzie. Now, Rod McKenzie was a kind of CIA mafia fringe kind of guy, had served in the Korean War, and was one of those tough dudes, if you see what I mean. He was asked to be the manager of the Dallas safe house, and had known the people involved in the assassination, and was in Dallas at the time of the assassination, was managing this safe house. He knew Oswald, he knew J.D. Tippit, and he knew Ruby, and he knew a whole cast of other people. He had mafia handlers and CIA connections. And so this guy was very, very much involved in the observance of what was going on around that whole time in Dallas with this group of people. So Rod's account really was very, very important, and he asked Richard to edit his memoir about his life and that whole scenario. And Richard spent a long time with Rod, going over very many details, and the end result of that was that Richard edited this book with Rod. This is called The Men That Don't Fit In. Okay, so this is Rod's account edited by Richard. Now, this is available on Amazon as a download. Okay, this book, so you can go and get this information for yourself. Okay, but it's very interesting. So Rod and Richard spent a long time in discussions, and Richard is a very, very meticulous researcher and wrote everything down. And having lived with Richard for some time, you would be amazed at the stack of research journals and notebooks. The guy was writing everything down all the time and researching all the time. Just everything was documented. So he was very, very careful to write up very meticulously everything that Rod said, and asked him questions about it. Now, Rod said some very interesting things. Rod told Richard that there were 2 hit women available if needed for the assassination. Now, we certainly knew of one of them. One of them is a lady called Ruth Ann Martinez. Now, this lady was part of the hit team that was up on the 6th floor. She wasn't a rifle shooter. She was not an assassin on that day. She was a radio comms lady, and she had an earpiece and a radio mic, and very likely the CIA had already developed some kind of mobile phone technology, and they were using some early mobile phone technology ahead of time. Obviously it wasn't introduced to the general public at this point, but technology is always 25-30 years in advance before it hits the shops. So they were obviously using some way of communicating, and the the other people up in the 6th floor were Loy Factor, who shot wide, and Mac Wallace, who these things were confirmed. These things were confirmed by Rod McKenzie, even before Loy Factor had written in his account, or given his account for the book, The Men on the 6th Floor. Okay, so Rod had said there were 2 women available. He knew Ruth Ann, and we asked the question, well, if it wasn't, we know Ruth Ann, who was the other one? Okay, so there was a question pending there. And then Rod said to Richard that Jackie Kennedy was certainly in the know. He had the information that they had made Jackie complicit in the head ahead of time, that the assassination was going to occur. Okay, so let me just make it clear. Rod did not tell Richard at any level, at any context, that Jackie was an assassin. I'll just make that very, very clear. We got to that because we joined the dots together, but it was not Rod's direct comment to Richard about that. So Rod is saying that Jackie was complicit. Now, in the know. There's a couple of things that we need to think about with that, because once you've got somebody next to somebody that you know is going to be assassinated, they have to be completely on board with that. Completely on board with that. Because if not, they are going to obviously have the potential of stopping the assassination or blowing the whistle on it later. So you have to have some way of guaranteeing their silence. And there's 2 ways that you will achieve that as a conspirator. The first way is that you oblige them into the works and you make them just as complicit in the actual death as anyone else. So you see, if you are going to do that and you equip that person with a gun and you say you're going to put the final shot in, you have made that person just as much an assassin as anyone else from anywhere else, off the Knolls, off the TSBD, anywhere else. So if they then expose what they know, or let's say, well, they've actually exposed themselves. The other way to handle that is you just kill the person. You just kill them and then they can't talk. So there's only 2 ways you can do that. So we know that Jackie wasn't killed in the aftermath of the assassination at any point. Another sniper could have very easily taken her out at some point later on, but she remains alive. Okay, so the only other option now is, knowing that she's complicit, she has to be involved, and involved at a very serious level. So that was the first thought really that got Richard's cogs whirring. He came to me in the summer of 2018 and said, Rach, I think Jackie shot into JFK. And my response was, whoa, no, you can't go there. Please don't, let's go there. Exactly the same as anybody else, you know, almost the recoil of this can't possibly be true. But I went on a journey because Richard went through his thoughts and feelings and we bounced the questions off each other. And we realised as researchers that nobody had really honestly looked at this question in any manner of depth before, to find out exactly the sequence of what had gone on in the back of that limo with the last 3 shots, and why we were feeling uncomfortable as to what was actually occurring with Jackie. So we really did look at that in depth. Okay, so we had Rod McKenzie telling us these things, and just not saying it directly, but hinting that there was complicity there. And then Richard found a video on YouTube, and I want you to go and look at this video yourself, by a guy called Alan Lamont. and he had done a video which depicts Jackie as the shooter, and he very clearly set out his stall as to why that is the case. And we were very, very intrigued and wanted to know further about how the machinations of what he was saying were actually correct. So we wanted to know the order of the shots and what exactly had occurred. And in addition to that, at the same point in time, we came across another video by a guy called William Cooper. Now, Bill Cooper was a intelligence asset and had stumbled across a confidential classified document in the 1980s that talked about the driver using a pneumatic pistol and shooting JFK in the car. And he had done an interview on live TV to talk about these things. And so that was out there. Okay. And Bill Cooper was, he wrote a book called Behold a Pale Horse. And he also had a radio show which was talking about lots of things that he understood from his background in intelligence services. And he was actually one of the people, or a person, that predicted the attack on the World Trade Center at 9/11. And some 6 to 8 weeks after that, he was outside of his house and was victim to a drive-by shooting. So they took him out because this guy predicted correctly that 9/11 would happen before it did. So there's no reason to suppose that his information was wrong. And that video is on YouTube, as far as I know, unless they've taken it down. So please go and have a look at that, because it's really, really interesting information. So we had come to the point where we had some information, and we had viewed this video by Lamont, and we had viewed this video by Bill Cooper, and it brought us to the place of understanding that there was very possibly an in-car hit team in the back of that limo. And we asked a lot of questions back and forth to each other about why that would be the case. Because as people often say to me, but if Jackie did it, why would she do it in public? Why would she just not poison him in the bed or shoot him in the head in the White House when they were on their own? Well, there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because she was not operating as a scorned wife. Yes, he had affairs, but actually, so did she. So did she. So what's good is for the goose is good for the gander, I guess. She knew about that. She tolerated it to a point. Yes, she wanted a divorce. And you could argue the point that JFK being dead renders her all of the money as the marriage ends, rather than just half if she divorced him. You could argue that point. But in actual fact, we found evidence that Jackie was a CIA agent, had worked for the CIA, recruited into the CIA in the early 1950s. And if you go and get my book Endgame, which I wrote in tribute to Richard, I have documented that in her own handwriting. There's a document in that book which talks about her rejecting one job offer in favour of another job that she had agreed to with a man from the CIA. So she was very, very definitely recruited into the CIA, and we believe by Alan Dulles, because Alan Dulles was a close family friend of the stepfather of the Bouvier family. So it's all starting to fit together, and we can see this idea. Now, Lamont was talking very much from the point of view that the Jesuits planned this hit, and it was a Jesuit arranged operation. And yes, very certainly Jackie was a Jesuit in nature. So there is that aspect as well. But actually, I believe it's all of these things are coming together, and they're all playing a part. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The agenda is to kill JFK by the time that he gets to that underpass. It must be guaranteeable. It must be done. And so therefore you have to find a way, as a huge conglomerate of people that are working towards the same, to 100% guarantee that outcome. Now, the only way that you can actually guarantee that outcome is to have a up close and personal shot from very, very short range. Very, very short range, because the minute you take that outside of the car, although it may well be guaranteeable to some regard, there's still distraction. There's still something that could go wrong. The further away you are, the less likely it is to be guaranteeable. And in 97%, probably higher, of all murders, the victim is the closest to the perpetrators, closest to the victim at the time of death. Okay, so yes, Jackie could have done this at the White House, but it was important to the conspirators that this be a public execution. This was not a private murder. This was a public execution, a king in the carriage being slaughtered. And that is all to do with the symbology of what that actually means in the moment, which is a whole nother topic. Okay, so we really understood then that there was definitely going to be some kind of plan to get this in-car hit team operational. But of course, if you just have a ride in a car and somebody shoots you, you're going to look at those people closest first off. Okay, that's obvious. That's obvious. So what you have to do is you have to find a way of providing distractionary shots outside of the vehicle, a barrage of shots to cover all of the shots, so nobody knows then where the actual shots have come from and which ones are the ones that. And that's exactly what we've had all of these years. We've got armchair arguments all of the time, all over Facebook, all over the forums, and people saying the question still remains because we don't know who did it. And that is by design. That is by design. They planned this so that the question in the main could not be answered. It's only when we start to look at these things and unpick them at this deep level can we find out that in actual fact this is exactly what did occur. Okay, so I want you to go and look at the Zapruder film very carefully in slow motion, and I want you to watch her action. Don't focus on any of the other shots. Just watch Jackie's movements and her body position and her reaction, because Richard and I talked about lots of things to do with just her in the back of that car. He said to me, Rach, I think from a very young age that there's something wrong with her response in the back of that car. And he had the still photographs produced in the Time magazine when he was 7 or 8 years old. In 1964 they started to publish the still photos, because the Zapruder film didn't go out into the public domain until the mid 1970s, but they certainly produced some still photos. And they talked about it was known that Jackie had climbed out of the car and gone onto the back of the trunk. And Richard said to me, it doesn't feel right. That action in the back of the car doesn't feel right. And we talked about that quite a bit, and I'm going to tell you now what we discussed, because why that is that it doesn't feel right. And the first question to ask is the question about how does she know, how could she possibly have known that the shooting sequence had finished? In other words, how does she know that it's safe to climb out of the car? There is no possible way to know that. There is no possible way to know that unless you know that the shooting has finished, and that's okay to do that, or you've been tasked to do that for a specific reason. Because natural instinctual response under fire, if you are feeling attacked in any way, is to get low. Okay, now we see very clearly that Nellie Connolly pulls John Connolly, Governor Connolly, onto herself in the car, and they both kind of fly backwards and lay down. But we don't see that from Jackie. What we see from Jackie, go and watch her actions, is whilst JFK's got his hands up here, she's pushing or even dragging his hands down away from his face. And this is to clear a path so that Greer can turn, point and shoot that pneumatic toxin dart straight into his temple up here. Okay, so it's not as you would expect it to be. It's not as she's grabbing hold of his collar and his jacket and pulling him towards her. This is how it should be. She should be pulling him towards her and going backwards. That's not the motion that we see. Watch it carefully. That's not, we're seeing this motion, pushing his hands down. It's completely different. Okay, so that was the first thing we noticed. And then obviously she climbs out of the car. So you wouldn't do that. You would be you're under fire. You believe that the president's going to be attacked because he's going to be the main target anyway. You get down as low as you can, and you don't climb up again until somebody gives you the all clear. That is a natural instinctive response. You don't have to think twice about it. You don't have to plan it. You don't have to process it. It just will kick in a millisecond as to that's what you would do. It's a survival instinctual response. Okay, so there was that. And you see, it doesn't fit. Her instinctual response doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit. So we have to ask the question, how did she know that the shooting has finished safe enough to climb out the car? And what was she actually climbing out the car for anyway? I mean, we've been told it was to collect brain matter, but where has that idea come from? Who told us that that was the case? Who said that that's what she was doing? So how do we know that that's even the truth? Okay, so these are the questions we must ask. These are really important questions, because unlocking the questions, being brave enough to ask the questions, leads us to the answer. And I'm always, you know, guys, I'm always saying this to you. Ask the questions, and ask more questions, because it's really important. Super important. Now, later on at Parkland, later on in the day, the whole weekend, in fact, there's not one picture, there's not one account, there's not any reference at any point that Jackie Kennedy is in floods of tears and beside herself with grief. And that again is a huge indication here that there is something very wrong with this lady's response. Now, the media has sold us the "she was dignified and composed" line. Now, the media, you surely know by now, the media gives media spin and tells a story anyway, which way it wants to justify anything. Okay, so you can go along with this dignified and composed kind of idea, but the problem with that is that if a loving wife is dignified and composed, like the Queen maybe, or whoever, not crying in public because they're making themselves you know, be strong, they are not going to be like that the rest of the time when the cameras are not looking at them. In private, they're going to be floods of tears. And I know for sure, as you know that I will know, that when you lose somebody who's very dear to you like that, you spend at least the first 3 to 4 days doing nothing else but cry. And your eyes look puffy and red, your whole face is blotchy, your nose is running, you go hoarse with crying, you cannot do anything else, you can't function. You're in such heavy grief. And so when you kind of pull two a little bit together, your eyes are puffy red, you look very washed out, very sore and red. And all of these things, there is not one piece of evidence anywhere that depicts Jackie in that state. Not on the Friday afternoon, not on the Friday evening, not on the Saturday, not on the funeral, no time at all, and no account from anyone that she was in floods of tears. So this is a marker now. We've got to look at these things and we've got to wonder why that is the case. Okay, why that is the case. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about, I've said this before, there are a couple of other things I just want to say. Jack Ruby, when he had finished kind of killing Oswald in the basement and he'd spoken with his lawyer, made a really strange comment. Okay, now his comment was along the lines of, I did what I did to Oswald because I did not want Mrs. Kennedy to come face a trial in Dallas. Now that is a really, really odd thing to say. Okay, a really strange thing to say. And we have to remember that Ruby knew all of the players and knew all of the angles and knew the whole score top to bottom of this entire hit, because he is the one linking the ground crew and the actual organisation and machinations of the hit with the higher players. Ruby's the linchpin. Okay, so when we think about that comment, and when we think about that in context of Ruby understanding that Jackie was an assassin, it makes complete sense, doesn't it? Think about it like that and it makes complete sense, that comment. Okay, something that he didn't need to say at all. He didn't need to bring her into it. Just a crazy thing to say. And what we find is that people very often will speak the truth. It's called an embedded statement. So it's a truthful statement, but it's kind of like hiding in plain sight. And how many times are we seeing disclosure and things coming out and this kinds of thing, and it was staring at us in the face all the time? And I just want to put that out there because it to me, it feels like a very telling statement when we look at it round this way. Okay, so this was the journey that Richard and I had been on, and the end result of that was we put together, when we understood how this worked, we put together this book called The Killer Queen. Now, this book is available on Amazon as an e-download, so it's really important if you're going to get this book, get the 2022 updated edition, okay, and get a hold of this book, because everything I'm saying about Jackie being the killer is in this book. Now, I just want to make it really clear as day. She was not the only assassin, okay? There were teams in the 6th floor. Oswald was not a shooter. Definitely not the shooter. There were teams in the Daltex. There was 2 teams on the grassy knoll. And all of these teams shot into JFK or tried to take a hit. So by no means was Jackie the sole a hit lady. She was not, okay? There's a barrage of shots. And part of the reason for that is, remember when they killed, is it Nero, I think, and they all drove their knives in at the same time. And certainly even in modern day executions, military executions, if that ever comes to that, they will have a series of buttons on the wall, maybe 4 or 5 buttons on the wall, and they will instruct the guards, 5 of them, to go push a button each, but of course only one of those will be operative, so nobody knows which one has actually activated the trap to let the noose come down. It's that kind of thing, okay? It's that kind of thing. It's corporate. It's all of everybody in it together, and what that does is it bonds the team to purpose, because then it's very much more difficult then for anybody to have regrets. It's very much more difficult then for anybody to shout later on, I was part of the team, or brag. It's like a little bit of a safeguard there. So it's the same kind of idea that you've got multi-shooters, okay? So the last 3 shots into the car, we've got James Files or whoever shooting into the from the knoll into the side of the head. Okay, And we've got Jackie shooting up through the left side. So Jackie's shot came up through the left side here and exited up the top through the head. Then the shot from the knoll here at virtually the same point in time. Okay, at Z313. And Greer shot up ahead of time into the forehead here. So we've got 3 shots in the back of that limo. And that formulated the in-car hit team. And they were in it together. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to bring to you, because it is research is a journey, okay, and we get to a new place of understanding from the place we stand today, and the things we discover today provide a platform for us to launch some ideas and some questions, and to formulate new ideas, and to join dots and make realizations and understandings about what truth is really all about. Now, truth is truth is truth is truth. I wish with all of my heart that this was not true, okay? And I've always wished that this wasn't true. But unfortunately, everything that we've documented, everything that I ever talk about, has shown me, very sadly, that it isn't true. And I wish it wasn't, but it is true. And so because it is, we got to be grown up enough to face it and not just dismiss it out, you know, just, we can't do that anymore. Let's ask the questions and let's find the truth, because there's more truth to be found. Okay, so that's me. Okay, bye.